Order, order.
Crown Estate Bill.
Would everyone ensure that all electronic devices are turned off and switched to silent mode? We now begin line-by-line consideration of the bill. No food or drinks are permitted during sittings of the committee except for the water provided. Hansard colleagues would be grateful if members could email their speaking notes to hansardnotes@parliament.uk or alternatively pass on their written speaking notes to the Hansard colleagues in the room who are here. The selection list for today's sitting is available in the room and on the parliamentary website. This shows how the clauses and selected amendments have been grouped together for debate. A reminder that a member has put their name to the lead amendment in a group is called first, or in the case of a stand part debate, the minister will be called to speak first. Other members are then free to indicate they wish to speak in the current debate by bobbing, which you all know is standing up and down. At the end of the debate on a group of amendments and new clauses, I shall call the member who moved the lead amendment or clause again. Before they sit down, they will need to indicate if they wish to withdraw the amendment or the new clause or to seek a decision. If any member wishes to press any other amendment, and this includes grouped new clauses in a group to a vote, they need to let me know. I hope that explanation was helpful. Finally, I remind members about the Code of Conduct relating to registered interests. Are there any members who wish to declare an interest? Do so now. There is no interest. Thank you. First, I call the Minister to move the programme motion standing in their name, which was discussed yesterday by the Programming Subcommittee for this bill.
I'd like to move formally.
The question is, the programme motion, as on the amendment paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call the Minister to move the motion about written evidence.
I'll move formally.
The question is the motion as on the amendment paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Amendment 4 to close Clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider Amendment 7 and Clause 1 stand part. I call James Wilde to move Amendment 4.
Thank you very much, Ms Furness, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to get the committee started. This morning, Clause 1 amends the Crown Estate Act 1961 to remove certain statutory restrictions on the Commissioner's powers and clarifies and expands those powers in certain respects. Specifically, it broadens the Crown Estate's investment powers and confers a broader power to borrow, subject to Treasury consent. As well as speaking to Clause 1, I will speak to Amendment 4 tabled in my name. And this Crown Estate Bill was conceived under the previous government. I'm pleased that the bill has now progressed to this stage, and we support Clause 1's objective to increase the Crown Estate's ability to compete and invest, so it maintains and enhances the value of the estate and the income derived from it. Assets managed by the Crown Estate, as the committee will know, are not the property of the government, nor are they part of the sovereign's private estate. Since George III, the assets are held in right of the Crown. In other words, owned by the Crown as an institution, not personally by the monarch, and the concept of the Crown encompasses the interests of both the sovereign and the government. That's why it's important that there is appropriate scrutiny of the Crown Estate. It has assets worth £15.5 billion, a portfolio of 185,000 acres, and manages roughly 7,400 miles of coastline. It's also the largest contiguous owner in the West End. And it returns all the net profits to the Treasury. In 2023-4, it recorded a net profit of £1.1 billion, and over the last decade, the Crown Estate has generated £4.1 billion for the nation's finances, which is a laudable record, but there is the potential to do more. And the Crown Estate estimates the changes in Clause 1 will enable it to generate £100 million per annum in additional revenues to the Treasury by 2030, as forecast in the original business case that led to this legislation. It's right, therefore, we should help to modernise the estate as it aims to create lasting prosperity for the nation. At present, the Crown Estate is limited to making investments in certain types of real property and certain restricted types of security held on the Crown Estate's behalf by the National Debt Commissioners. But the estate's powers to borrow are very limited for the purposes of discharging or redeeming encumbrances affecting the estate. So the bill will modernise it by removing those powers. So, Chair, whilst we support the borrowing power, we are concerned there is a lack of parliamentary oversight of the borrowing levels. This is a new power. The Crown Estate should be prudent on the level of borrowing, and the purpose must be supporting the estate's duty to maintain and enhance its value for maximised return to the taxpayers. That's why we have tabled Amendment 4, which would limit the amount the Commissioners may borrow by regulations subject to the affirmative procedure for statutory instruments. Specifically, the amendment would limit borrowing to a net debt-to-asset value ratio of no more than 25% initially. When pushed by Baroness Veer and other noble friends in the other place, the government stated that a limit on borrowing is better placed outside of legislation and that controls will be set out in a memorandum of understanding between the Crown Estate and the Treasury. At second reading, the Minister repeated this, saying there will, as has been noted, be an MOU in place between the Treasury and Crown Estate that will govern how the borrowing powers will be used. The target borrowing level in that MOU sets out that the loan-to-value ratio should not exceed 25%. And given the government agrees there should be a limit, we should introduce robust safeguards in statute to protect against unconstrained borrowing. An MOU is easily altered at a stroke of a pen between the Treasury and the Crown Estate. And if Parliament is being asked to remove the restriction to allow the Crown Estate to borrow, then I struggle to see the logic on why the government thinks that the cap it has committed to should not be set in legislation initially, with the ability to amend it by secondary legislation if necessary. I'd be grateful if the Minister would address these concerns and confirm whether the government has considered this proposal since second reading. And a limit must be subject to the affirmative procedure, which is a proportionate step which will ensure the Crown Estate can access that borrowing to maintain and enhance the value of its land, property and interest for the benefit of the nation. But borrowing can be risky, so this is a new power and it should be subject to some controls and we should be cautious. I contend this is a perfectly reasonable check on the borrowing power, and I hope we can get the committee off to a positive start with the Minister accepting our amendment. Thank you.
Amendment 4 to Clause 1. As on the amendment paper, the question is that the amendment be made. And I've got Cole Pippa Halings.
Thank you very much. And I'm rising to speak for a similar amendment, which is 7, but is supportive of Amendment 4 in its essence. And that is about introducing the sensible borrowing limit for the Crown Estate Commissioners by capping their net debt to asset value ratio at 25%, with any change to this limit requiring parliamentary approval. As it stands, as we've just heard, Clause 1 of this bill grants the Crown Estate significant new powers to borrow and access financial assistance from the Treasury. And whilst investment in the Crown Estate's portfolio, particularly in the areas like offshore wind, is welcome, it's vital that we ensure fiscal responsibility and protect the long-term value of these assets for the nation. So the amendments are about introducing proper safeguards. The Crown Estate manages over 16 billion in assets, and its revenues contribute directly to the Treasury and public finances. Without a clear borrowing limit, we could risk unchecked debt accumulation, which could ultimately undermine the estate's financial sustainability and reduce the returns it provides to the Exchequer. A 25% debt-to-asset ratio is a reasonable cap, and it allows for investment and growth, but prevents excessive leveraging that could put the estate's finances at risk. And crucially, this amendment also ensures parliamentary oversight. Any changes to this limit must be debated and approved by both houses, rather than left solely to the discretion of the Treasury. This isn't about preventing the Crown Estate from borrowing, it's about ensuring that borrowing is responsible, transparent and aligned with the long-term interests of the nation. Given the Crown Estate's unique status and the importance of its revenues to the public purse, it's only right that Parliament retains a say over any significant increase in borrowing capacity. And this only confirms assurances were provided in the other House by Lord Livermore. In his work with Baroness Kramer, it was assured that there would be a cap on borrowing to 20% of the loan value ratio in the updated framework agreement. And so these amendments reflect these promises, and I urge the Government to support this amendment to safeguard the financial integrity of the Crown Estate and ensure that borrowing powers are used wisely and with proper oversight.
I call the Minister.
Thank you very much, Ms Furness, and it's a pleasure to serve on this committee with you as Chair. And I will turn to the amendments in a moment, but I'll firstly briefly address why Clause 1 of this bill should stand part and through what it achieves in terms of amending the Crown Estate Act 1961. The reason why this clause amends the 1961 Act is to clarify the powers of commissioners and to remove certain statutory restrictions in respect of borrowing. These changes are central to the aims of the bill, which are to modernise the Crown Estate and remove limitations on investments to ensure it can meet its core statutory duties. Those duties, which it is right for the Crown Estate to pursue in the national interest, are to maintain and enhance the value of the estate and the returns obtained from it. Now, the Crown Estate is a commercial business, independent from government, that operates for profit and competes for investment. However, limitations placed on it by the Crown Estate Act 1961 currently risk its ability to compete and invest most effectively, meaning it is less able to deliver returns to the public purse than it might otherwise be. There are therefore two main changes made by this clause. The first is that this clause clarifies the investment powers of the Crown Estate Commissioners by expressly conferring powers which are currently implicit in the 1961 Act. This ensures that the Commissioners have a power to do anything which is designed to facilitate or is conducive or incidental to discharging their statutory duties, including, as they've already set out, their core duties to maintain and enhance the value of the estate. It also removes restrictions on the Commissioners' powers to invest. Through these broader investment powers, the Crown Estate will have greater flexibility to invest in new growth opportunities, for example, in the digital technologies to support the acceleration of offshore energy through digital mapping of the seabed. These broader powers will also unlock the Crown Estate's ability to undertake de-risking activities, such as surveys and grid coordination, which will increase the frequency of offshore wind leasing and support the clean energy mission. Second, Clause 1 inserts a new section into the 1961 Act, which grants the Crown Estate a power to borrow out of the National Loans Fund via the Treasury or otherwise subject to Treasury consent. It also authorises the Treasury to provide financial assistance to the Commissioners. This change will unlock the Crown Estate's ability to compete more effectively by enabling it to borrow as its competitors currently can. This clause has been carefully drafted to include the requirement for Treasury consent prior to the Crown Estate accessing debt. This strong safeguard will ensure borrowing is carefully considered and controlled. Furthermore, as borrowing will be from government at commercial rates, it means that the interest paid by the Crown Estate will outweigh the cost to government of the borrowing. Any borrowing undertaken by the Crown Estate will be for investment in activities which will drive increases in its revenues, thereby also increasing the profits it generates and provides to the government, which helps provide funding for our public services. This will be a net benefit to the public finances, and it builds on the Crown Estate's long track record of delivering significant returns to the public purse year after year, which, as the Opposition Minister mentioned, has totalled more than £4 billion in the last decade. I will now turn to the Amendments 4 and 7, Madam Chair. These amendments, tabled by the Honourable Member for North West Norfolk and the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire, seek to place a legislative limit on borrowing through regulations. It is the Government's view that limits on borrowing are best set outside of legislation. And for this reason, a limit will be set in the Memorandum of Understanding between Treasury and the Crown Estate, with the cap set at no more than 25% net debt to asset value ratio. This document has been made available in draft to aid the House in its scrutiny. As I have set out, the primary safeguard built into the bill is the requirement for Treasury consent. We are also retaining the requirement for the Crown Estate to maintain and enhance the value of the estate, whilst having due regard to the requirements of good management as set out in the 1961 Act. Taken together, these elements provide clear guardrails and strengthen the important fiduciary duty of the Commissioners not to take decisions that could endanger the estate or compromise its core duties. To underscore this point, Madam Chair, given two opposition members raised questions about this matter, the bill is clear that any borrowing undertaken by the Crown Estate can only be from the Treasury or otherwise with Treasury consent. The Treasury will, of course, ensure that any borrowing is consistent with our wider fiscal rules. So in addition to the requirement to secure Treasury consent, the Memorandum of Understanding between the Treasury and the Crown Estate sets out additional guardrails. So, for instance, the draft MOU sets out the borrowing should target a sustainable range and is not to exceed 25% loan to value, defined as the ratio of net debt to asset value. As with any public sector borrowing, the Treasury will ensure that this is consistent with managing public money principles to ensure value for money for the taxpayer. And on that basis, I hope the honourable members will withdraw their amendments. As I have said, Madam Chair, Clause 1 will provide the Crown Estate with the powers to borrow, subject to Treasury consent, and clarifies their investment powers. Together, these changes will modernise the Crown Estate and give it the tools it needs to compete more effectively in the commercial world, and as a result, increase the revenue it generates for the public purse. And I therefore commend Clause 1 to the committee.
I call the Shadow Minister to respond.
Thank you very much, Ms Furness. I was disappointed to hear the Minister's response. Obviously, he didn't quite address the point of an MOU, but I appreciate that he's provided a draft to the committee. An MOU can simply be changed by ministers and the Crown Estate deciding that they want to change the level. We've just, only in the last week or so, passed into law the Charter of Budget Responsibility, setting out the government's fiscal rules in statute. So I'm not quite sure why there's an in-principle objection to setting out such borrowing in legislation. I think it's a prudent step to have as we embark, the Crown Estate embarks on a new period with this borrowing power. I will therefore be seeking to push my Amendment 4 to a vote.
I call Pippa. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Amendment, is everyone... No, I'll get there. Amendment 4 proposed to Clause 1 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. No. Division. Lock the doors.
Luke Charters. Not here. Is he here? Luke Charters, no. Zoe Franklin. Pippa Halings.
Abstain.
Adam Johi. Lincoln Jop.
Aye.
Jane Kirkham. No. Noah Law.
No.
Yunus Mehdi. Perrin Moon.
No.
James Murray.
No.
Melanie On.
No.
Steve Race. Dave Robertson.
No.
Andrew Snowden.
Aye.
Alistair Strathern.
No.
Christian Wakeford.
No.
James Wilde.
Aye.
The ayes were 3 and the noes were 9. So the ayes have it. Sorry, the noes have it.
This victory of Parliament. Recount.
Rick Kine, this is my first bill committee that I've chaired. Yep. We now come to the question that Clause 1 stamp parts, which we've just debated. The question is that Clause 1 stamp part of the bill, as many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Or of the contrary. I think the ayes. I think the aye. Ayes. I'll get there. Be patient. Right. Next page. We now come to Amendment 5 to Clause 2, with which it will be convenient to also consider Clause 2 stamp part. I call James Wilde to move Amendment 5.
Thank you very much, Chair. We almost had it. Clause 2 amends Schedule 1 to the Crown Estates Act 1961. Specifically, it will increase the number of commissioners from 8 to 12 and require them to be paid out of the returns generated by the Crown Estate rather than out of money provided by Parliament, as is the case today. I'll speak to Clause 2 and Amendment 5 tabled in my name. Clause 2 is intended to bring the Crown Estate's operating practice in line with the best practice for corporate governance. And subsection 2 seeks to provide flexibility to allow the board to include the combination of executive and non-executive directors to reflect its increasingly diverse activities. Subsection 2 also removes the requirement for the second Crown Estate Commissioner, currently a post held by the Chief Executive, to be Deputy Chairman. Again, this seeks to satisfy the best practice that the roles of Chairman and Chief Exec should not be exercised by the same person. And we are supportive of these changes. And at this point, I'd like to put on record my thanks again to Baroness Vera of Norbiton for her work in pushing the government into giving assurances that the chair of the Crown Estates Commissioners could be added to the Cabinet Office's pre-appointment scrutiny list. Now, I understand we are awaiting a date to be set for that pre-appointment hearing for Richard Lewis by the Treasury Committee. Subsection 3 would require salaries and expenses of the Commissioners to be paid out of the returns of the estate to reflect the Crown Estate's commercial freedom and function, and to place the Commissioners in a position more consistent with general commercial practice. I'll turn now to Amendment 5. As I've just set out, as well as modifying the governance, Clause 2 alters the way in which Commissioners are paid. Parliament will no longer need to approve salaries and expenses of the Commissioners and their staff. However, I do believe that some form of parliamentary oversight is needed here. At present, the estimate details supply finances as voted on by Parliament at the beginning of the financial year. Amendment 5 would simply require the Commissioners to notify the Chancellor of the Exchequer of any proposed changes to the remuneration framework governing the remuneration of the Chief Executive set out in the framework document. The Chancellor of the Exchequer must then also lay before Parliament any such notification. Currently, remuneration policy and framework for the Crown Estate staff is the responsibility of the Board's Remuneration Committee. And the framework document states that the committee will share any planned changes to the framework with HM Treasury to seek their agreement. Given that Parliament will no longer be needed to approve the salaries, does the Minister agree that it would be a sensible step to ensure Parliament is at least notified of any changes to the remuneration policy affecting the Chief Executive? At present, the framework document sets out the maximum remuneration of the Chief Executive should be in line with or below that of the lower quartile of an appropriate benchmark group agreed with the Treasury. It also states the clear majority of the total reward package should be conditional upon performance, with a significant element conditional upon long-term performance given the Crown Estate's primary duty. And we on this side support rewarding success and the delivery against targets. However, any such changes to the policy should be considered by Parliament. At second reading, the Minister said, as the Crown Estate is statutorily an independent commercial organisation which returns hundreds of millions of pounds in profit to the Exchequer each year, continuing the success is crucial, and it requires the organisation to have the freedom to compete for the top talent in the commercial world. I absolutely agree. We all agree on this side, but I struggle to see how ensuring that Parliament is simply notified of changes to the Chief Executive's pay policy will restrict the Crown Estate's ability to compete for top talent. It's about transparency, and it would simply provide much needed scrutiny to a process where there is currently parliamentary oversight and vote, given the statutory purpose for which the Crown Estate exists. I will welcome support for our amendment and look forward to the Minister's response.
Amendment 5 to Clause 2. As on the amendment paper, the question is that the amendment be made. I bring the Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I will turn to Amendment 5 in a moment. But briefly, I'll begin by setting out what Clause 2 seeks to achieve, because Clause 2 makes changes to the Crown Estate's governance to bring the Crown Estate's constitution in line with best practice for modern corporate governance. Now, there are 3 changes made by Clause 2 which I will deal with in turn. First, this clause would increase the maximum number of commissioners on the Crown Estate's board from 8 to 12. This will provide the Crown Estate with the flexibility it needs to satisfy best practice standards for modern corporate governance. For example, this change will allow the Crown Estate's board to include a wider combination of executive and non-executive members, both to reflect its increasingly diverse and wide-ranging activities and enable it to adopt appropriate committee structures. However, I would like to assure the committee that while we are increasing the number of commissioners, except for the new commissioner roles introduced by Clause 6, we are not changing the way in which they are appointed to the role. This means that the exact number and the respective roles of the commissioners within this new maximum will remain subject to the public appointments process. As such, additional commissioners will be appointed by the King on the recommendation of the Prime Minister, as is usual practice. This also includes the new commissioners with special responsibility, which we will consider in Clause 6, for which there will also be a process of consultation with the relevant devolved government. The Chair will face additional pre-appointment scrutiny, as the Financial Secretary confirmed in the other place. Second, this clause removes the requirement for the second Crown Estate Commissioner, a post currently held by the Chief Executive, to be Deputy Chair. This change will align the Crown Estate with best practice standards, which set out that the roles of Chair and Chief Executive should not be exercised by a single individual. And third, Clause 2 will require the salaries and expenses of the Commissioners to be paid out of the return obtained from the Crown Estate, rather than out of money provided by Parliament, which is the current position. Changing the source of funding for Commissioner salaries is intended to demonstrate more clearly the relationship between the relevant expenditure and Crown Estate income, whilst also reflecting the Crown Estate's commercial functions. However, the pay of the Chair and other non-executive commissioners will continue to be set by Treasury Ministers, and in line with the UK Corporate Governance Code, will not include any performance-related element. Turning now, Madam Chair, to Amendment 5. I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, and clearly the highest standards of independence and probity will be required by the Chair in order to execute their duties, in particular given that we have now not in any way brought back to Parliament the ability to raise debt on the assets of the Crown Estate. All of which I feel duty-bound, therefore, to ask the Minister whether he is aware of media reports that the Chancellor's preferred candidate for the chair of the Crown Commissioners has been recently a Labour Party donor, giving to the Labour Party £15,000 in 2023 and to the Foreign Secretary £30,000. And so I don't think it's unreasonable of the Shadow Minister to seek the level of transparency that this amendment does by asking for any future changes to salaries for chairs to come back to Parliament. Thank you.
The honourable member asks about the amendment that his front bench colleague has tabled. And I was just about to turn to that, so perhaps if he allows me to address the amendment, that will answer at least some of the questions which he raises in his intervention, because Amendment 5, tabled by the honourable member for North West Norfolk, would require the Commissioners to notify the Chancellor of the Exchequer of any proposed changes to the remuneration framework relating to the Chief Executive set out in the framework document, and for such notification to be laid before Parliament by the Chancellor. If I may, I would like to set out the current arrangements relating to remuneration for the Chief Executive of the Crown Estate. Now, the Chief Executive's pay is a matter for the Crown Estate's Board in the first instance. However, it is set with reference to the agreement between the Treasury and at a level which is the lower end of the Crown Estate's comparable peers, reflecting the national significance of the organisation. The framework document between the Crown Estate and the Treasury is clear that the Crown Estate, and I quote directly, will share any planned changes to the remuneration framework with the Treasury to seek their agreement. And I think this very much delivers on the spirit of the honourable member's amendment. The Crown Estate's annual report and accounts already, as a matter of course, include a comprehensive report on remuneration and includes details of Chief Executive pay. And taken together, these arrangements already deliver on the essence of Amendment 5. And I would therefore hope that with this explanation, the honourable member feels able to withdraw it. The primary intention of this bill is to modernise the Crown Estate and ensure it is best able to operate in the modern commercial environment, and these changes are central to that aim, and I therefore commend that Clause 2 stands part of this bill.
I have no other speakers. Can I bring in the Shadow Minister to respond?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm grateful for the contributions on this point and for the Minister's response. And obviously, I have read the framework agreement closely. I think the point is that at the moment, the Crown Estate will notify the Treasury of changes, and ultimately Treasury will come to Parliament through the estimates to approve the pay and based on that policy. But what's going to change is that the Crown Estate will be paying from within the income that it generates. So whilst the Treasury may then still know that there's been a change, no one else will necessarily know. And whilst I take the point about the annual report will detail potentially any changes, that's obviously a lag. The policy could have been in place for some time before before that happened. I'm not sure the Minister addressed the point my honourable friend made about donations and whether that's something the Chancellor was aware of before she nominated the proposed chair to this position. I think it's important that we do get an answer to that on the record. Ms Furness.
Is everyone content? No, I'm doing it wrong. Do you wish to pass it to a vote? Thank you. Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Aye. Amendment 5 proposed to clause 2 as on the amendment by leave withdrawn. Yeah. We now come to the question that clause 2 stand part, which we have just debated. The question is that clause 2 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Right. We now come to Amendment 1, proposed to clause 3, with which it would be convenient to also consider Amendments 6 and 8. The member this amendment is not a member of the committee and therefore cannot move it. Is there anyone present who has intended to speak to this amendment on their behalf? Is it Jane Kirkland? Oh my goodness. Melanie on.
Thank you very much, Mrs Furness. Pleasure to serve under your chairmanship of this committee and participate and speak to this clause that has been submitted. And just to talk a little bit to the intention of this clause and the extension of the relevant section in relation to sustainable development, the intention behind this is to ensure that due regard is given to the funds that the...
Can I just interrupt you?
You absolutely
you have to move the amendment. You're actually talking to the amendment at the moment. So just say, I'm moving amendment.
Oh, well, I'll move the amendment.
And now
Sorry.
now you can
Don't put the sorry in the notes. Thank you. That the intention of the amendment is for the additional funds that the Crown Estate will be able to unlock, which is very, very welcome, to improve investment in the country, rather than it being tied up coming back into Treasury to then be redistributed, that there is an arrangement to support funding from the Crown Estate in projects and activities that it is already engaged in to support those local regions where those projects are taking place. And it doesn't seem to me to be that unreasonable that consideration should be given as part of the Crown Estate's considerations to the UK's net zero targets. These are expected of other organisations. You know, it is one of the key missions of government, and so to have some sympathy and some similarities in the way that organisations are expected to conduct themselves when it comes to their overall objectives seems to be straightforward to me. It also adds in additional check-ins, in a gentlest of ways, check-ins for the Crown Estate to ensure that the wider community benefits, of which so many do come from this bill, and this bill is very welcome for that purpose, but that those wider community benefits that have the opportunity to generate lasting change in coastal communities are part of the considerations of the Crown Estate and should be included specifically within the bill. Thank you.
Amendment 1 proposed to clause 3 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made. I call Jane Kirkham.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Crown Estate until now has made decisions on leasing of the seabed based mainly on price and cost and nothing else. Obviously, this bill will change that. It will ask the Commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on sustainable development. This clause simply clarifies sustainable development and what that means. So the net zero targets, economic growth.
We'll stop you there, it isn't in scope.
Make sure in 1, 6 and 8, that's all we're talking about.
We're just talking about 1, 6 and 8. Well,
Just keep it strictly.
yeah, if we can keep it strictly to clause 1, thank you.
Yes, yes.
Not amendment.
Amendment 1.
Amendment 1. Amendment 1, clause 3.
Yeah.
So the point of the amendment is to simply clarify and expand slightly upon the meaning of sustainable development. So I would simply ask that the Minister could consider this and could give assurances that that is what this bill is intended to do, and that is the that will be the progress and the direction that the Crown Estate will move in future.
Linus Meddy.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I rise to speak on Amendment 6, tabled in my name. This amendment would amend Clause 3 of the bill, which relates to the regard of sustainable development that the Crown Estates Commissioners must have when undertaking their activities. This amendment would require the Commissioners to set sustainable development objectives for their activities and require them to have regard for UK-wide legislation such as the Climate Change Act 2008 and Environment Act 2021. I note this is also the intention of Amendment 8. In addition to this, Amendment 6 also requires regards for devolved legislation in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. For Wales, this would include the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and the Environment Wales Act 2016. Shockingly, child poverty in Wales is set to reach its highest rate in 30 years by the end of this decade, with more than 34% of children living in low-income families. This is 5% up on the current rate, and it could see around 32,000 more children pushed into poverty in Wales. The activities of the Welsh Crown Estate could be geared towards helping to address rising child poverty by having regard to the 7 well-being goals of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act, such as to develop a more equal, prosperous and resilient Wales. More broadly, this amendment is drawing inspiration from measures within the Scottish Crown Estate Act 2019, which legislates to ensure that management of the Scottish Crown Estate assets must be done so that it is likely to contribute to economic development, regeneration, social well-being and environmental well-being. The Crown Estate manages a huge amount of land and natural assets. It is only right that across all nations the Crown Estate works with existing devolved legislation to meet sustainable and well-being goals and to do so by fulfilling clear objectives. I urge the Government to incorporate this aim into the bill.
Pippa Halings.
Thank you, and I move to speak to Amendment 8, which is very similar in nature also to Amendment 6. But what it does is it strengthens Clause 3 by ensuring that sustainable development is properly defined within the Crown Estate's framework document, and that this definition explicitly includes a climate and nature duty. Now, I know that the Crown Estate plays a pivotal role in the management of our land, seas and natural resources, and it is well known for its ambition around nature recovery. It's a key player in our offshore wind expansion, biodiversity conservation and sustainable land management, but in areas where there are also other multiple competing uses and values, including fishing and including marine protected areas and even highly protected marine areas. And therefore, we need reassurances, as were obtained in the other House, that this is not just requiring Commissioners to keep under review their impact on sustainable development without clearly defining what that means in practice. And I must acknowledge where this amendment started in life, and that's with Baroness Hayman's work in the other house, where after much debate, it was agreed that sustainable development must be kept under review by the commissioners, but with a reference to the framework document where a definition would be provided. And in Baroness Hayman's words, she said, "What matters is the impact we have and how much we have shifted the dial in terms of what the Crown Estate achieves in support of the government's climate and nature objectives." So this amendment seeks to provide that clarity and accountability for what was agreed verbally in the other house, that the definition wouldn't be on the front face of the bill, but it would be in the updated framework agreement. And we need that to ensure there's a consistent benchmark against which decisions can be assessed in line with the public duty to our climate and nature targets, which are within, as would be the definition within the framework agreement with specific reference to the climate targets under the Climate Change Act 2008 and the nature restoration goals under the Environment Act 2021. And this would mean that the Crown Estate cannot simply pay lip service to sustainability. It must actively contribute to decarbonisation, biodiversity protection and the broader environmental goals of the UK. Climate change and nature loss are economic risks as well as environmental ones. So embedding clear, enforceable sustainability duties in the Crown Estate's framework according to our existing legislation will ensure that its investments and operations support long-term resilience and property. So this strengthens the existing clause, does not seek to try and define it within the front face of the bill, but assures us, as happened in the other house, that the definition is within any framework agreement. Thank you.
Perrin Moon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would also like to speak to Amendment 1 of Clause 3 and add my voice to the request for assurances from the Minister in relation to sustainable development and the alignment of sustainable development with the UK's net zero goals, but also in relation to community benefits. And I'm conscious that, quite rightly, in agreement with the Minister that we mustn't lay too narrow a scope on the Crown Estate and not make seek to limit its opportunity as a key revenue driver for the UK economy. Goodness knows we need it after 14 years of Conservative failure. But what I'm really concerned about is the potential bypassing of that revenue from the Crown Estate to the Treasury, the potential bypassing of deprived coastal communities. And so it would be nice to get some reassurance from the Treasury of the government's plans to ensure that those coastal communities closest to many of these huge revenue opportunities are going to see some of the benefits of that growth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chairman, it's a pleasure to serve under you on this committee. And I'd actually like to echo the final points, not some of the other points, obviously, that the honourable member made, which is around assurances from the Minister about the economic benefit that these offshore projects in particular generate for local communities. I represent the beautiful Fylde coastline and therefore represent a coastal community, and north of us is Blackpool and Fleetwood, and the Crown Estate owns significant amounts of coastline, seabed off the coast of Fylde. And there are a number of projects, including the Morgan and Morecambe Wind Farm, which is currently underway, which is going to cable through the Fylde constituency to get to the national grid. And these amendments talk, they reference, for example, the Environment Act. They also reference regional economic growth. And I suppose the point I would like to get reassurances from the Minister on is that when these projects that will be further encouraged by these amendments go ahead, such as offshore wind, that the local communities are taken into account in terms of the economic benefit. Because at the minute, a lot of the projects end up being opposed and very unpopular by local communities because all they see is the environmental damage that is being done to their area, their countryside, their coastline, and there is no economic benefit left from residual cabling that runs through areas. So whilst I welcome some of what these amendments try to do, I would seek assurances that at the heart of this is that the communities that are negatively impacted by these projects see benefit as well.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much. Ms Fennis, Clause 3 is the first of a number of clauses added at the report stage in the House of Lords and would amend Section 1 of the 1961 Act to require the Commissioners to review the impact of their activities on achieving sustainable development.
Stop the Shadow Minister. We are only talking about 1, 6 and 8.
We talk about Clause 3.
And Clause 3 later.
Clause 3.
Clause 3 will come later,
Okay.
Just the amendments.
after the amendment.
Yeah, but the debate on the clause is later.
Yeah, the debate on the clause
We'll have a
will
separate
come
stand-part
Yes.
debate on the clause. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just refer to the Honourable Member moved Amendment 1 on the Crown Estate Commissioners to have regard to net zero targets, regional economic growth and ensuring resilience in various areas. And instinctively, I'm a bit sceptical about putting more obligations on the Crown Estate, given its primary purpose is to generate the return for the nation. And as I mentioned in passing, Clause 3 does already apply a sustainable development duty, but the Honourable Member for Great Grimsby and Cleethorpes thought I spoke pretty persuasively, so I look forward to the assurances that the Minister might give before seeing whether the committee divides on this amendment.
Minister to respond.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And with your permission, I might briefly add to my comments in the previous debate, because the opposition spokesperson asked further about the appointment of Chair. And just to put very briefly on record, if I may, that on December the 23rd, the government announced Rick Lewis as its preferred candidate for Chair of the Crown Estate. The government also confirmed the appointment would be subject to a parliamentary pre-appointment hearing. As per section 9.2 of the Governance Code, political donations should be publicly disclosed if a successful candidate has made a significant donation or loan in the last 5 years to a party, and this will happen at such a time if the appointment is confirmed following the Treasury Select Committee's report and a subsequent announcement is made. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your patience. I'll now turn to the amendments which we're discussing as part of this debate, and I will begin by addressing Amendment 1, which was tabled by my honourable friend, the member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire, and which other honourable members have spoken to in this debate. This amendment would require the Crown Estate Commissioners, in reviewing the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development, to have specific regard to the UK's net zero targets, regional economic growth and ensuring resilience in respect of managing uncertainty, risk and national security interests. I was glad to meet with the honourable member for Mid and South Pembrokeshire on Tuesday this week to discuss this amendment. Whilst the government understands the motive behind his amendment, it is important to set out some of the context behind Clause 3 first, and I will be very brief as I realise we will turn to Clause 3 in detail in a later group. The government and the Crown Estate welcome the introduction of Clause 3 during the passage of the bill in the other place, as it clarified and enhanced accountability on the Crown Estate to deliver on environmental, social and economic outcomes. The Crown Estate are already a trailblazer in their efforts on tackling climate change and supporting the environment, which I will turn to in more detail later on. Clause 3 will require the Commissioners to keep under review the impacts of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the UK. Now, it is important to note that the public framework document, which governs the relationship between the Crown Estate and the Treasury, will also be updated in light of this new clause to include a definition of sustainable development and to confirm that the Crown Estate will continue to include specific information on their activities in their existing annual report. Madam Chair, the Crown Estate Act 1961 establishes the Crown Estate as a commercial business, independent from government, that operates for profit and competes in the marketplace. It is analogous to a private sector commercial operator. The Commissioners operate under a clear commercial objective, as set out in the 1961 Act, to maintain and enhance the value of the estate. At the same time, the Crown Estate is already able to, and does, focus on activities which also closely align with wider national interests, including on the environment, net zero, our nation's energy needs and sustainable economic growth. As a public body, the Crown Estate seeks to work with the grain of prevailing government policy. In addition to their core commercial objective, the Crown Estate also operate under a duty in the 1961 Act to have due regard to the requirements of good management. This obliges the Crown Estate to maintain and enhance the value of the estate responsibly. Good management practices also include maintaining a strong governance structure, adhering to best practices in risk management, and fostering a culture of accountability and transparency. Now, it is important that this bill stands the test of time, and that as new, relevant areas of concern on the environment, society and the economy emerge over the coming decades, which currently include net zero and regional economic growth, These are given regard by the Crown Estate and should be covered in their annual report too. The general term sustainable development was chosen since it is broad and captures the widest range of relevant concerns across the environment, society and the economy, both now and as priorities within those areas evolve over time. And I'll give
Thank the Minister for giving way, and I recognise that whilst it may not be the place of statute to outline some of the specifics that Amendment 1 brings forward, does he not agree that the spirit of Amendment 1 is well in keeping with the missions of this government, and moreover that particularly the point of regional economic development that spreads to all corners of Britain is very important, and that it is incumbent on the Treasury more widely to ensure that this takes place, particularly, I might add, through the channel of supply chain development.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. He's absolutely right that a priority of the government is not only to ensure economic growth at a national UK level, but to ensure that all regions and nations of the UK benefit from that economic growth and increase in productivity, because we want to ensure that people right across the country are better off, have more money in their pockets through greater investment and growth in their local areas. And that's a very important point that my honourable friend raises. Madam Chair, returning to the definition of sustainable development, and briefly to address a point raised by, I think, the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire about the definition of sustainable development. And I can assure her that definition will be published on royal assent of this bill, so it will be published at that point. But it was a deliberate decision, Madam Chair, not to specify specific targets or objectives, such as net zero, on the face of this bill, given the Crown Estate are already required to maintain and enhance the value of the estate responsibly, and referencing specific targets risks complicating the Crown Estate's existing clear commercial objective. As I've already noted, the Crown Estate are required to pay their entire net profits to the UK Consolidated Fund every year, worth over £4 billion over the last decade, which support the UK government's spending on policy priorities, including net zero and indeed regional economic growth. On national security interests specifically, it is important to be clear that the government is responsible for ensuring national security interests are managed effectively at a UK-wide level. It would not be appropriate to require the Crown Estate to have a specific regard in this matter. As I have noted, whilst the Crown Estate has goals under which its own strategy can align with wider national policy objectives, the 1961 Act provides the Crown Estate with independence and autonomy. The government believes the Crown Estate should continue to operate in this way, as a commercial business independent from government, and this particular requirement would encroach on that independence by drawing the Crown Estate into interests managed directly by the government. The government believes that the Crown Estate's existing duties give it a clear focus, leading to a consistently significant return to the Exchequer to support the funding of public services and priorities. The duty to have due regard to the requirements of good management, alongside the new requirement to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development, are already sufficient to cover my honourable friend's concerns, and I hope that amendment is withdrawn. Turning now, Madam Chair, to Amendments 6 and 8, tabled by the honourable members for Innismone and South Cambridgeshire. Amendment 6 would require the Commissioners, in complying with subsection 3A on sustainable development, to set and publish sustainable development objectives in relation to their activities, to take all reasonable steps to meet these objectives, and have regard to the relevant environmental legislation for the UK, England, Wales and Northern Ireland in relation to meeting these objectives. It further specifies that relevant environmental legislation includes the Climate Change Act 2008, the Environment Act 2021, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act 2015 and the Environment Wales Act 2016. Amendment 8 would require any framework document published by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the Crown Estate or the Commissioners to define sustainable development, and that definition must include a reference to climate and nature duty. It further specifies that a climate change duty means a duty to achieve any of the targets set out under Part 1 of the Climate Change Act 2008 or under Sections 1 to 3 of the Environment Act 2021. Madam Chair, although the Government understands the intention behind these amendments, a key purpose of the 1961 Act was to repeal various detailed statutory provisions that had built up over 150 years previously, which were hampering the effective management of the estate. By focusing the Commissioner's duties on enhancing the estate's value and the returns generated, the Commissioners have a clear objective for which they can be held to account. It is an important objective that giving an organisation too many objectives will make it far less effective than giving it clear, focused priorities. As I've already noted, the Crown Estate are a commercial business, independent from government, that operates for profit. Although they have goals...
Just to seek clarification on that, would you therefore be saying that unlike seemed to be the agreement that was reached in the other House, that we would not be looking here through this legislation and through any burden put onto the Crown Estate, that they would, like other bodies, be seeking to have a duty to climate and nature, and that would not form part of the definition of sustainable development in the Royal Assent, as you mentioned previously, as was mentioned previously?
Well, I thank the honourable member for her intervention, and as I mentioned a few moments ago, the definition of sustainable development will be published on Royal Assent, and so perhaps we can return to any questions she may have on that definition at that point. But the fundamental point that I'm seeking to make is around ensuring the Crown Estate can operate effectively, and by having clear, focused priorities, it will operate more effectively than having too many objectives, which end up meaning that overall it will perform less well in the public interest. And indeed, as I've already noted, Madam Chair, the Crown Estate are a commercial business. They're independent from government, they operate for profit, and although they have goals which under their own strategy can align with national policy objectives, fundamentally the 1961 Act grants the Crown Estate an independence and autonomy. Now, the government has accepted the amendment to require the Commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development. However, by expanding the Crown Estate's core purposes and legislation, particularly with additional duties or objectives that may unnecessarily complicate or conflict with the achievement of the core commercial objective, it risks undermining that core objective being achieved. Any actions that undermine the core commercial objective risk undermining the very funding that is used to support environmental and other policy objectives. The government believes that the Crown Estate should continue to operate in this way as a commercial business independent from government because it has shown itself to be a trusted and successful organisation with a proven track record in effective management. Now, as I've already noted, the Crown Estate are already a trailblazer in their efforts on tackling climate change and supporting the environment, and they are required to pay their profits into the UK Consolidated Fund each year. Furthermore, I can confirm that the requirement under Amendment 8 for any framework document between the Treasury and the Crown Estate to define sustainable development has already been agreed to by the government. As confirmed on November the 5th during a report stage in the other place, the public framework document that exists between the Treasury and the Crown Estate will be updated in light of this amendment to clarify that sustainable development means regard for the impact of the Crown Estate's activities on the environment, society and the economy. It will also make clear that this regard includes, where relevant, consideration of relevant legislation, such as Part 1 of the Climate Change Act 2008, which deals with the targets set for 2050, Section 56 of the Climate Change Act 2008, and Sections 1 to 3 of the Environment Act 2021, which also deal with specific environmental targets. The framework document will also make it explicitly clear that the Crown Estate will include in its annual report a report of its activities in relation to sustainable developments. And for these reasons, Madam Chair, I trust that honourable members feel able to withdraw their amendments.
Thank you. Melanie On.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't intend to move this to a vote. I do accept the point about the Crown Estate being a commercial business. I'm less persuaded that they are unable to cope with an additional objective. If I think about organisations within the public sector and the number of objectives that we set upon them, I'm fairly sure that a commercial business has got the wherewithal to be able to manage it. However, I do accept the potential for impact on return for that commercial business, and I think and I hope in the indications regarding the annual report that the Minister mentioned that he will have heard today the determination and the importance that coastal community members have expressed here today about the strength of feeling and the necessity to ensure real delivery and community benefits from these extended powers and facilities that we're providing to the Crown Estate. And while we won't be moving this to a vote, when it comes to accountability we know where the Minister's door is, and I'm sure that she'll be happily knocking on it should the need arise. Thank you.
Is everyone content for the amendments to be withdrawn? The ayes. Amendment by leave withdrawn. I want to call Hinnes Medday and ask that if she wishes to press Amendment 6 to a division.
The amendment.
Thank you. Amendment 8 to Clause 3 was debated with Amendment 8 to Clause 3 just now. If Pippa Halings has indicated that they wish to press Amendment 8 to a division, can I ask you to move it if you want to?
Given the assurances that we've received that both sustainable development will be able to have the chance to discuss that when it is being defined by oral assent, and that also the framework document there will be due regard in terms of the climate and nature duties with regard to our targets for 2050 under the Climate Change Act and our Nature Restoration Act duties under the Environment Act. That is good. I would just like to urge the Minister within the context that it is an economic choice to consider climate and nature up front, not only that we then raise the money to then provide for environment funding post-operation. And I think that is something that we should all embrace, particularly within the Treasury. Thank you.
We now come to Amendment 9, proposed to Clause 3, with which it will be convenient to also consider new Clause 10. I want to sort of impress on you all now, this really only refers and is being debated is Amendment 9 and Clause 3. No, Clause 10. New Clause 10.
Clause 3 is debated, yeah.
Clause 3 will be debated next, so I'll say that again. Only Amendment 9 and new Clause 10 are to be debated at this point in time. Thank you. And I call Pippa Halings to move Amendment 9.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And given that we've had conversations about the importance to consider our coastal communities within this whole debate about the new powers that have been given to the Crown Estate, I'd like to draw attention particularly to the example that we can see on the North Norfolk coast, which is the fastest eroding coastline in northwest Europe. They're key sites vital to our energy infrastructure and security on this North Norfolk coast. And for decades, Bacton Gas Terminal has been a cornerstone of the UK's gas network, ensuring the smooth distribution of supplies arriving from overseas. Just along the coast in Happisburgh, we find the landfall sites for the Norfolk Boreas and Norfolk Vanguard wind farms, which will generate 1.4 and 1.8 gigawatts of power respectively, critical contributions to our renewable energy future. To protect Bacton's vital infrastructure, a £20 million sandscaping project moved 2 million tonnes of sand, shielding not just the terminal, but also the village of Bacton and Walcott. Yet in Habsburg, despite its pivotal role in our transition to clean energy, no such protections have been put in place. Already, 40 homes have been lost to coastal erosion, and the latest National Coastal Erosion Risk Mapping data shows that even more of the village is at risk in the years ahead. This amendment ensures that as we harness the power of North Sea wind, we also safeguard the fragile North Sea coast, protecting the communities that host this vital infrastructure. And Clause 10, do I speak to that? No. And again, with new Clause 10, which I move. Once again, we've heard about the importance of considering coastal communities within all of the decision making. And this new clause on marine spatial planning coordination would ensure that the Crown Estate's decisions on marine priorities are properly coordinated and aligned with the Marine Management Organisation that has the mandate for mediating priorities of uses on our seabed and along our coast. So therefore, affected communities, particularly our fishing communities, would therefore be properly and fully consulted through the Marine Management Organisation. This is similar to the land use framework. This is like the sea use framework and the marine spatial plans that the Marine Management Organisation is mandated to undertake. We need a joined-up approach to decision-making, with marine plans balancing the economic, environmental and social interests. Therefore, the Crown Estate must work in full coordination with DEFRA's Marine Spatial Prioritisation Framework. I will.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you to the Honourable Member for giving way. It is the case that the Crown Estate has started to consult. They are publishing plans beforehand, before they actually take decisions on where they're going to put these, some of the floating offshore wind stations, for example. I just wondered whether the Minister could give assurance that that will be the case in the future, and when the Crown Estate are planning to build out the ocean, that the consultations will happen with the fishermen and with environmentalists as well. I think that was the intention from the second reading. It was discussed there.
I'd like to thank my honourable member. I know that in the Chamber also we discussed this. So I think this is the crux of this amendment. There is a mandate for the Marine Management Organisation, which is the one that mediates. The Crown Estate is being given new powers for borrowing and investment. It therefore has a vested interest in terms of the prioritisation of any activities that would be allocated along the seabed and along our coasts. That is good in terms of their amazing award-winning powers in geospatial mapping. And we've just seen examples of how they are showing for the government scenarios of the different uses and economic income and gains that could be gathered from different uses. However, despite their incredible geospatial mapping prowess, it is not the Crown Estate that should be the one to prioritise and make that final decision as to which activities take place. And communities and other users must be fully consulted. It is the mandated MMO that has that, and DEFRA has the Marine Spatial Prioritisation Framework within which the Crown Estate should contribute and coordinate. And it is that assurance that we are seeking through this amendment.
Thank you. Amendment 9, proposed to clause 3 as on the amendment paper. The question is that the amendment be made.
Can I speak to this?
Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Ms Furness. I only rise very briefly to speak to Amendment 9, not least as I represent North West Norfolk, next door to North Norfolk, and I grew up in North Norfolk. And it's quite difficult sometimes to get the names locally correct, but it is actually Haysborough rather than Happisburgh. So I just wanted to get that on the record because people there feel quite strongly about that, because it's a mistake that's inadvertently made quite a lot. But it is important to protect from coastal erosion, and particularly national assets like those at Bacton. I would expect the Crown Estate to already be taking account of such requirements, as well as the government through its wider planning and strategic approach to coastal erosion. So I look forward to the Minister's response on how coastal erosion will be prevented.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I rise to speak to the Amendment 9 and new clause 10. And to begin with Amendment 9, tabled by the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire. This amendment would mean that in satisfying subsection 3A, which states that the Commissioners must keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the UK, the Commissioners must assess the adequacy of protections against coastal erosion in areas affected by their offshore activities. Now, I very much understand the concerns reflected in this amendment. However, protections against coastal erosion are not the responsibility of the Crown Estate, and this amendment is therefore not relevant to this bill. The UK has a dedicated statutory bodies in each devolved administration with responsibility for ensuring adequate protections against coastal erosion. The Crown Estate always collaborates and complies with the relevant statutory authority for any assessment of the impact of offshore activity on coastal erosion, and the potential for coastal erosion is considered as part of the marine licensing, which is considered by the relevant regulator dependent on jurisdiction. However, the statutory responsibility falls on the relevant body in each devolved area. The Crown Estate only become involved in coastal defences when the statutory bodies responsible for coastal erosion wish to construct defences. In such cases, the Crown Estate typically grant leases to these bodies for defence works. Whilst the Crown Estate is not responsible for this area, the Government is committed to supporting coastal communities and investing a record £2.65 billion over 2 years in building, maintaining and repairing our flood and coastal defences. Shoreline management plans are developed and owned by local councils and by coastal protection authorities to provide long-term strategic plans which identify approaches for managing coastal erosion and flood risks at every stretch of the coastline. Shoreline management plans have recently been refreshed with updated action plans. This follows several years of collaborative work between the Environment Agency and coastal groups. The Environment Agency have published the updated National Coastal Risk Map for England. This is based on monitoring of coastal data, the latest climate change evidence, and technical input from coastal local authorities. There are also strong safeguards to manage the flood and coastal risk through the planning system, and I hope on that basis the Honourable Member feels able to withdraw her amendment. I will now turn to new clause 10. This new clause would require that in relation to any decisions made about marine spatial priorities, the Crown Estate must both ensure that the decisions are coordinated with the priorities of the Marine Management Organisation, and they must consult any communities or industries impacted by the plans, including fishing communities. I can confirm to the committee that the Crown Estate and the Marine Management Organisation already have well-established ways of working together to ensure effective collaboration for marine spatial planning and prioritisation. The Crown Estate's collaboration with the Marine Management Organisation and other relevant statutory bodies is governed by the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009, which establishes the framework for marine planning and licensing in the UK. This requires the Crown Estate to have regard to marine policy documents such as marine plans in their decision-making. It is also governed by the habitat regulations, which require the Crown Estate to conduct plan-level habitat regulation assessments for leasing or licensing activities. Furthermore, the Crown Estate and the Marine Management Organisation jointly agreed a statement of intent in 2020, which is reviewed periodically to provide a focus on priorities and opportunities for alignment as well as longer-term ambitions. That statement of intent complements a Memorandum of Understanding agreed in February 2011, which sets out a framework to encourage cooperation and coordination between parties in relation to the sustainable development of the seabed and rights managed by the Crown Estate, based on active management, shared information, and effective marine planning and management by both parties. In addition to the Crown Estate's relationship with the Marine Management Organisation, there are also various regulatory requirements on developers who lease areas of the seabed from the Crown Estate to engage with the Marine Management Organisation through a number of routes. These include through marine licensing, where developers must obtain marine licenses from the Marine Management Organisation for activities that could impact on the marine environment. This process involves consultation with statutory bodies and adherence to marine plan policies. As part of the marine licence application, developers must also conduct environmental impact assessments for projects that could significantly affect the environment. This includes consultation with the Marine Management Organisation and other relevant authorities to ensure compliance with environmental regulations. Developers are also encouraged to engage with local communities, statutory bodies and other stakeholders throughout the planning and development process to address concerns and ensure compliance with marine plans. This new clause therefore duplicates existing regulatory requirements and indeed existing practice, and I hope the Honourable Member feels able to withdraw her amendment.
Andrew Snowden.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. I actually feel simply both with the contributions from both honourable members here, which is that there are some issues at the heart of what the amendment and the new clause are trying to achieve, but equally whether it is the scope to be the responsibility of the Crown Estate is equally a valid point. New Clause 9 talks about coastal erosion, and I think whilst that is an issue, there is also the issue of coastal damage that are caused by projects where particularly the seabed is licensed. Again, Morgan and Morecambe off the Fylde coast will see years of work trying to rebuild sand dunes that will be cabled and tunnelled through for a new cabling corridor completely damaged due to activity that's coming in to connect to the national grid. And furthermore, on the new clause, basically it talks about consultation. And I think this is where I really do have some sympathy with the Minister. This isn't the responsibility necessarily and primarily of the Crown Estate. The root cause of this issue is that there are already regulations in place where licences are being issued for consultation to happen. The consultation happens, people consult, they then just ignore local communities and industries. nothing happens, objections that are perfectly valid, perfectly alternative routes for cabling corridors, etc., that are coming in from the sea are put in, are just ignored. I think that's a broader issue than it is specifically just for this point.
Fit for Halings.
I think on both of the amendments, I will not move those to division. However, I would like to call the attention that given the greater borrowing and investment powers, that the existing frameworks and regulations under which the coordination between Crown Estate and the Marine Management Organisation has been operating, I think we could all recognise that this has changed hugely. And therefore, I would urge the government to consider how it will make sure that consultation and decisions around prioritisation of what happens where greater weight is given and more resources are given and powers to the MMO to ensure that that happens. Thank you.
Is everyone content for the amendment to be withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. We now come to clause 3, standard parts, with which it will be convenient to also consider new clause 11. The question is that clause 3 stand parts of the bill. Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Clause 3 amends the Crown Estate Act 1961 to require the Commissioners to keep under review the impact of their activities on the achievement of sustainable development in the UK. Now, I've already referred to various aspects of Clause 3 as part of our earlier debate, so I will try to be brief. As honourable members know, this clause was added as an amendment in the other place, based on the productive debates that reflect the important role that the Crown Estate has in stewarding our natural environment. As I already noted earlier, the Government believes that the Crown Estate's existing duties give it a clear focus, leading to a consistently significant return to the Exchequer to support the funding of our public services. At the same time, the Crown Estate is able to, and does, focus on activities which also closely align with wider national interests, including on the environment, net zero, and our nation's energy needs and sustainable economic growth. As a public body, the Crown Estate seeks to work with the grain of prevailing government policy. That being said, it is right that the public and private sectors make every contribution they can to help achieve our climate change targets, and the Crown Estate should continue to be a national trailblazer in this regard. The Crown Estate has committed to becoming a net zero carbon business by 2030, aligning with the 1.5 degrees target, and will prioritise activities which help enable a reduction in national carbon emissions, such as building net zero homes, transitioning its holdings to sustainable agricultural practices, and working in partnership with government to meet the national renewable energy targets. On the biodiversity targets in the Environment Act, the Crown Estate is committed to delivering a measurable increase in biodiversity by 2030. It will publish its delivery plan to meet this goal later this year, which will include commitments to restore habitats in line with targets in the Environment Act. The Crown Estate also published its approach on nature recovery last autumn, where it has committed to delivering increased biodiversity, to protect and restore freshwater, marine and coastal systems, and to increase social well-being benefits from nature. However, the reforms being introduced by this bill are not intended to alter the fundamental statutory basis of the Crown Estate as a commercial business independent from government. The Commissioners operate under a clear commercial objective, as I've mentioned in earlier debates and as set out in the 1961 Act, which is to maintain and enhance the value of the estate. As I've already noted too, the Crown Estate operate under a duty in the 1961 Act to have due regard to the requirements of good management. Alongside their core commercial objective, this obliges the Crown Estate to maintain and enhance the value of the estate responsibly. It is the Government's view that these existing statutory requirements and this new clause is the best approach going forward. I will now address new clause 11, which was tabled by the Honourable Member for South Cambridgeshire. This amendment would require the Commissioners to assess plans for benefits to local communities and, in the case of offshore activities, coastal communities, before making any investment decisions. It would also require the Commissioners to transfer at least 5% of the Crown Estate's net profit to the local communities impacted by its activities. Now, Madam Chair, at present, local communities benefit from onshore and offshore developments in the form of economic benefits that such developments bring, including job creation and increased business for local suppliers, and individual developers, of course, also contribute to local initiatives. The Crown Estate has also specifically designed the leasing process for their offshore wind leasing round 5 opportunity in the Celtic Sea in such a way that developers must make commitments to deliver social and environmental value as part of the development of their new wind farms. These commitments will be monitored, reported on and enforced throughout the lifetime of the relevant round 5 developments. The Crown Estate is committed to proactively working with local communities and partners to enable employment and skills opportunities. For example, they've allocated £50 million through the Supply Chain Accelerator to stimulate green jobs, and they're developing a green skills pipeline from a GCSE in engineering skills for offshore wind, seed funded by the Crown Estate and developed with Cornwall College, to post-16 destinations renewables course with Pembrokeshire College. As well as this, the Crown Estate is partnering with the employment charity Workwhile to create green construction apprenticeships. The Crown Estate already works closely with communities, charities, businesses and the government to ensure that its skills initiatives are sensitive to market demands and emerging technologies to keep them relevant and effective. The government consider it important that the Crown Estate retains this flexibility in how its skills initiatives are funded and delivered to ensure that it can contribute to skills training in the best possible way and, importantly, without conflicting with its statutory duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate. I hope on that basis the honourable member feels able to withdraw their amendment. It is the government's view that these existing statutory requirements and this new clause is the best approach going forward, and I therefore commend clause 3 to the committee.
Pippa Haley's, there's no need to move this particular thing because we are just debating it and it will possibly be looked at later this afternoon when you will then, so you can move it if you wish. Yeah, it's very complicated. But you're allowed to talk to it now, so please do go.
Thank you. And I thank the honourable member who may have preempted my moving of this amendment in their response just now. And I'm moving this amendment, which ensures that local and coastal communities see real benefits from Crown Estate activities by requiring a proper assessment of community benefits before investment decisions are made, and by mandating that at least 5% of net profits be transferred to impacted communities. And for too long, communities, particularly coastal communities, have borne the impact of large-scale offshore developments without seeing a fair share of the financial benefits. We've heard this, though, earlier today. The Crown Estate generates billions in revenue from offshore wind farms, marine industries and land developments, yet too often local people see little direct return. This amendment seeks to redress that imbalance and ensures that these communities benefit from our journey towards net zero, taking people with us. Firstly, it ensures transparency and accountability by requiring that the Crown Estate formally assess community benefits before making investment decisions. This means that local communities will no longer be an afterthought. They must be considered from the outset in decisions that affect their livelihoods, identity, infrastructure and the environment. Secondly, it establishes a concrete financial commitment by mandating that at least 5% of the profits generated by the Crown Estate's activities must be reinvested in local communities impacted. This is a fair and proportionate measure, recognising that these communities are often on the front line of change, whether that be from offshore energy projects, tourism pressures or rural land use shifts. These kickbacks could be revolutionary for towns and villages across the UK and would be a real testament of how clean energy can level up communities. And this amendment's not just about fairness, it's about economic regeneration. It provides a direct funding stream to support local jobs, infrastructure, training and environmental projects. It ensures that prosperity generated from our shared natural resources isn't centralised in Whitehall or corporate boardrooms, but flows directly back to the people and places most affected. If the government is serious about levelling up and about supporting coastal and rural communities, then it should, and economies, it should have no issue backing this amendment. And it's practical, enabling us to manage the different developments. It does not seek to block development. It ensures that development happens fairly, sustainably, with proper coordination. Thank you.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Chair. I rise very briefly to just briefly speak to new clause 11. I think during second reading we heard a lot of debate and discussion about the role of community benefits, and I, as I mentioned, represent a coastal area where there are existing community benefit schemes through the operators of the offshore wind projects which operate on the East Anglia coast. And the Energy Secretary, he seems to be on a one-man mission to put solar farms on farmland and to put pylons across the countryside with no regard to the impact of that on communities or nature. It's said that the government will be bringing forward its own approach to community benefits. So I'm a strong supporter of community benefits. I look forward to the Energy Secretary actually coming forward with that plan, and that seems to be the best approach and the best context in which to address the very important points that the Honourable Member has raised.
Minister to speak.
Well, I thank the opposition members for their comments, and I think to reiterate a point I made in my earlier remarks, Madam Chair, that the Crown Estate already works with communities, charities and businesses and the government to ensure that its skills initiatives are sensitive to market demands and to emerging technologies. And we consider it is important the Crown Estate retains this flexibility in how its skills initiatives are funded and delivered, so that it can contribute to the skills training in the best possible way, and importantly, as I've referred to several times, without conflicting with its statutory duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate. Because, as we know, Madam Chair, the Crown Estate already pays its net revenue surplus into the consolidated fund. As we've referred to several times in this debate, that is a total of more than £4 billion in the last decade, and local communities already benefit from investment from the Crown Estate. I'd also point honourable members to the partnership between Great British Energy and the Crown Estate, where they'll work together to coordinate agencies and stakeholders to create jobs and ensure communities reap the benefits of clean, secure, homegrown energy. And so, Madam Chair, I repeat my encouragement of the honourable member to withdraw her new clause, as I believe the bill and the existing measures that exist, statutory requirements, achieve the outcomes that are best for this country.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part of the bill. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
And the contrary? No. I think the ayes have got... No. The ayes have it this time. The ayes have it. Right. We now come to Clause 4, stand part, with which it will be convenient to also consider new Clause 4. The question is that Clause 4 stand part of the bill. The question, the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Clause 4 of this bill requires the Commissioners to include in their annual reports a summary of their activities and of any effects or benefits resulting from their activities under any partnership between them and Great British Energy, which I referred to briefly in the previous debate. This requirement will only apply in relation to a year in which such a partnership was in operation. Now, following productive debate in the other place on the new partnership between the Crown Estate and Great British Energy announced last year, this clause was added by the Government. The Crown Estate is keen to ensure that details of this partnership are publicly available on an ongoing basis, and the Government agrees it is sensible to require the Crown Estate to include the relevant detail in its existing annual report, and this is the intention behind Clause 4. Turning now to the amendment, new Clause 4 tabled by the Honourable Member for North West Norfolk, which would require the Chancellor to lay before Parliament any partnership agreement between the Crown Estate and GB Energy. As I'm sure he will appreciate, partnership agreements are highly commercially sensitive. It is therefore right that any agreement is not made public or laid before Parliament, as to do so would likely prejudice the commercial interests of the Crown Estate or GB Energy and risks the aims of the partnership, which are to speed up the process of delivering clean energy and to invest in clean energy infrastructure. The Department for Energy Security and Net Zero will set out further detail on GB Energy in due course, and I hope the Honourable Member feels able to withdraw his new clause as a result. Madam Chair, Clause 4 is a sensible change to the bill, which reflects the desire to ensure relevant information related to nationally significant partnership between GB Energy and the Crown Estate is made publicly available, and I therefore commend Clause 4 to the committee.
Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much. Mrs Furness, as the Minister has referred to, Clause 4 was added at report stage in the House of Lords to require the Crown Estate's annual report to report on activities under the partnership between the Crown Estate and GB Energy. And as well as speaking to Clause 4, I will also speak to new Clause 4 in my name. And that Clause 4 does introduce an important layer of transparency, as the Minister said, ensuring there's a specific report on the activities of the commissioners under that partnership during the year and on any effects or benefits experienced during the year which are the result of those activities. This is a welcome step and we support this clause. However, this reporting requirement would only apply in years when a partnership between the commissioners and GB Energy is in operation. This means that we will not know what's been agreed until the partnership is operational. Parliament, I think not unreasonably, needs to see an agreement when it is finalised, and that is why I'm moving new clause 4. The new clause 4 would simply require the Chancellor of the Exchequer to lay before Parliament any partnership agreement between the Crown Estate and GB Energy. This new clause is of fundamental importance. Without being able to see the details of the partnership agreement, we do not know what has been agreed and the impact on the duties of the Crown Estate. On the day the bill was introduced, the government, with a lot of fanfare, announced the partnership between the Crown Estate and GB Energy. Indeed, ministers claimed the new GB Energy partnership would, and I quote, turbocharge energy independence and unleash billions of pounds of investment in clean power. However, currently there is a distinct lack of transparency over how this partnership will work and what difference it will make. And I'm concerned that this partnership may have been created for political rather than economic purposes. And forgive me, Chair, but I am a little bit cautious about what the government says about GB Energy. During the election, Labour claimed that GB Energy would help to cut energy bills by £300. Yet bills are going up. They continue to go up. In an interview only this week, Jürgen Meyer, the chairman-designate of GB Energy, refused to say when taxpayers could expect £300 off their energy bills. He said it's not the job of GB Energy to deliver that. He even conceded GB Energy will only create 200 to 300 jobs in the next 5 years. A far cry from the 1,000 that have been pledged previously. Does the Honourable Member wish to intervene? No? Okay, he's transferring from a sedentary position. Nick Butler, a former Labour advisor and former head of strategy at BP, said it's not clear what GB Energy will actually do. One thing we do know is GB Energy will spend £8.3 billion of taxpayers' money on an investment vehicle to de-risk the profits of multi-million-pound energy companies. The consequences of this Labour government's approach to energy and their drive to 2030, come what may, will prove very expensive for our constituents. Indeed, a report from Offshore Energy UK revealed that Labour's policy in the North Sea will reduce tax revenues from the sector by £12 billion, leading to tens of thousands of job losses as well. So GB Energy won't generate any energy, it won't be an energy supplier, and it won't save families £300 off their bills. Happily.
Just ask the honourable member if he doesn't welcome the potential proceeds of great British energy projects that could be unlocked by this new entity.
Well, my point, and the point about the new clause, is to try and get some transparency about what those proceeds might be. I don't know if the honourable member can enlighten me as to where they may be coming, which projects are going to be invested in, how many jobs are going to be created. He might then apply for the job of the chairman of GB Energy, because the current one doesn't seem to know the answer to any of those very important questions. And we're being asked to legislate to support a partnership between the new entity of GB Energy and the Crown Estate. So I make no apology for seeking greater transparency on this. And when pushed at second reading, the Minister confirmed, although, and I quote, although the partnership agreement itself will not be published, given that it will be commercially sensitive, I think he said very commercially sensitive this afternoon, the Crown Estate is committed to publish information relating to the partnership as part of its existing annual report. But at all stages through this bill, and the amendments have been brought forward, the government has had to be pressured to be more transparent. And given this bill makes significant changes to the operation of the Crown Estate and reduces parliamentary oversight, I do not see why Parliament should not have sight of an agreement. It's simply not good enough to hide behind commercial confidentiality excuses. And if the Minister is genuinely concerned about the commercially conservative, probably is, the commercially sensitive nature of the agreement, perhaps a redacted version could be laid before Parliament, for example. Or indeed, the full version provided to the Committee on Public Accounts. I had the pleasure to serve on that committee for over 2 years, and it was not uncommon for similar agreements to be provided in confidence to the Chair and the committee to provide assurance on behalf of other members of the House that this was a bona fide commitment that did not need to be drawn more widely to public attention, noting the strictures there may be about commercially confidentiality. I've spoken to the Chair, the current Chair of the Public Accounts Committee about this, and he would be very happy to receive such a copy of the partnership agreement and operate as he has done over a decade or more as Deputy Chairman, recognising and respecting the confidentiality and the basis on which it's provided. But that provides assurance for us all as members of the House that one of the preeminent committees of the House has oversight of that. So if the Minister is not minded to agree to our amendment, I detect that he's not, perhaps he will look at the feasibility of a redacted version or a similar approach to the Public Accounts Committee. And in advance of this committee, I wrote to the Chief Executive of the Crown Estate, Dan Labbard, to seek some more clarity about the partnership agreement. I'm grateful for him taking the time to respond. And I asked whether the Crown Estate's planning to agree to invest a certain amount with GB Energy. And his response was that any arrangements the estate enters into will be expressly subsidiary to our statutory duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate, but with due regard to requirements of management. We will ensure the Crown Estate continues to deliver on our wider obligations. Can the Minister confirm that the Crown Estate's statutory duty will always have primacy? And without the agreement being laid before Parliament, we will not actually have the transparency to judge that, to see if commitments have been given, and to judge and assess whether they meet that criteria. I also asked how the Crown Estate will decide between projects GB Energy backs and other projects may have a higher rate of return. I note the Honourable Member's comments, but it may be that the Crown Estate could identify some projects that aren't GB Energy's projects, which may generate a greater return for the taxpayer, for our constituents. And in that case, it should be investing in those, not in a political project under the Energy Secretary. And he said the Crown Estate will have a clear business plan in relation to the partnership, and the consideration of projects that fulfil the business plan will take into account the statutory duty to maintain and enhance the value of the estate and the obligation to secure best consideration, having regard to all the circumstances of the particular case at the time. All the circumstances is rather broad and take into account could be seen as rather weak. Can the Minister confirm whether he's seen a copy of any such business plan, whether he would expect to see any such business plan? And I fear the answer to this will be not, but whether he'd be prepared to lay a copy of any such business plan before the House so members can scrutinise it. And finally, I asked about the new division's decision-making process, because that's what this new clause is about, trying to get underneath the bonnet of the agreement. And he said that the agreement with GB Energy is such that activity undertaken through the partnership will not undermine the Crown Estate's independence. The intention is that both parties will seek agreement on investment decisions whilst retaining their own independence. The Crown Estate will not be compelled to agree to anything which it does not wish to agree to in fulfilment of its statutory duty. Compelled is a very strong word to use in that context. And at one level, those responses, Madam Chair, could be seen as reassuring. But then I have to think back to the exuberant press release I referred to earlier, the excitement contained within that announcement of what this partnership could deliver and what the government thinks that it could do. So can the Minister clarify how much he expects the Crown Estate to be investing in the Energy Secretary's personal investment fund? And can he rule out ministers pressuring the Crown Estate, whether through GB Energy, through the chairman, which they've appointed, or indeed the chairman of the Crown Estate, who is shortly to be going before the Treasury Committee? Can he rule out pressuring any of those people to invest more than the Crown Estate considers to be prudent? So I think I've raised, albeit briefly, I sense that I could go on for longer, but I'm not sure if the committee would enjoy that. But I think we're asking very reasonable questions about a partnership agreement, a groundbreaking partnership agreement. I'm just looking at the exciting press release in front of me here. And so I think it is incumbent upon the Minister to provide some clarity and some assurance, and to, I hope, actually, having listened to the argument, accept that it's not unreasonable to place before Parliament a partnership agreement that can be redacted and that a full agreement can be provided to the Committee of Public Accounts. So I look forward very much to his response.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that further consideration of the bill be now adjourned.
The question is that the debate now be adjourned. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary? I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Thank you, everyone.
Committee Room 9, sound. Committee Room 9, sound. Committee Room 9, sound. Committee Room 9, sound.